But I get the impression that people are just here just to be together, so I don't really feel much loyalty to that topic. Perhaps I'll just start with just seeing if anybody has any questions or anything you would like me to talk about, and let's see where it goes from there. And if all else fails, we can fall back on the topic.
What was your topic?
The essence of self-realization through service. Not bad. We can go back there if we need to. Yes.
Thank you for coming. What a wonderful honor. Thank you, everybody, for coming. You know, how I hear about Palo Alto. Any suggestions for us as a community here in the South Bay? We're small, and how to build that wonderful connection. What can we do here to grow and to get stronger and to thrive?
Can I add on to that?
Uh-huh.
My family was recently up at the family camp with a bunch of families from Palo Alto, and Erica and Greg and everybody. And my husband and I were thinking, maybe we could do an exchange with Palo Alto. You know, just I want to go see what's up there, and how do we?
Just contact. We have this is a sort of a tangential place to start the morning, but let's start here anyway. In our particular community, we don't own the community, we only lease it. And as a consequence, every square foot that we use, we have to pay someone else for, which gives us very little latitude in terms of hospitality. And it's a terrible situation, and we have resolved now to try to buy the property. The problem is it's the most expensive real estate in the US, except perhaps Manhattan. So we're looking at a $17 million project for our 5.5 acres. However, we haven't really quite declared, but we're just about to declare that we intend to succeed. So therefore, it's not as easy as we would like it, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. And you just have to be in touch, and because this is the point, is that we're all in this together. It's a very complicated issue as to how something really comes together. And people are always asking us, how do you make things work? I have several answers to it. Of course, we've been in existence in that community, just for those of you who don't know, which are only a few of you. I came to Swami Kriyananda in 1969. I moved to Ananda village in 1971. I lived 16 years there and met my husband David somewhere in that cycle, about 81, 82. We got married then, and a few years after we were married, 1986, Swami Kriyananda asked us to leave the rural community of Ananda village and go to the Palo Alto area, the Silicon Valley area. You're Californians, you know what I mean. Ananda had a small, had an embryo there, the beginning of. There were no urban communities at all, so it wasn't like there was something else anywhere. There was, what we had there was really close to what you have in Los Angeles right now. And actually not so different from what you have here, except we had an ashram house. That's why it makes it more like Los Angeles. There was an ashram house, there was a center that was about this size, and we also had East-West Bookshop, which was and is a very, but it's not an Ananda, it's not an outlet for Ananda, it's the universal side of our work, like the one that used to be here forever, that isn't anymore. Bodhi tree. So that was there, and that was actually the genesis of the Ananda community in the peninsula. When that bookstore, the owner of that bookstore wanted to sell that bookstore, Swami wanted to buy it, and that was how Ananda started. So we moved down into essentially what's in LA, and just now, it's 27 years later, we have a big temple, we have a school, we have a community that we don't own, that we lease, and we still run the Ananda bookstore, but we have a whole lot of just lots going on.
And the farm.
And the farm, I forget, because we just got that last year. And now we have a farm. When David and I moved into that situation, we had an absolute belief that Master's work needed many different expressions. At the time that we moved there, the word Ananda meant Ananda village. We did not use the phrase Ananda village. It was unnecessary. You just said Ananda and it was one place. There was Ananda always reminds me, there was a center in Sacramento, and there was a house in San Francisco, and there was what we had on the peninsula, but nobody took them seriously as Ananda. Ananda was Ananda village, because unless you were willing to leave everything behind and go live in this completely other way, it was not believed that you could really be dedicated to the spiritual path. It wasn't snobism, it was just inexperience. And people who went to run these various centers, the average lifespan of a colony leader was 18 months. They did 12 months of good work, then they suffered for 6 months, and then they finally got to come home. And that was the complete mindset. It's just like Ananda was Ananda village, and if you happened to get exiled and had the misfortune to get exiled, you suffered until you could come back. When David and I went on our journey, as it happened, we were actually trained for the job we were assigned, which was unique in Ananda history to be able to do that, because we'd worked at the Expanding Light, and I had also for the last 5 years or so been tootling around the West Coast doing programs. But we felt that Master's work had to have many expressions or else it would never grow. And so there was just this commitment inside of us that this was both possible and necessary, and that if it was ours to do, we were going to do it with everything we had. Now, we had the karmic freedom to have no other jobs. I mean, this was a full-time job for us. So it wasn't like we were trying to balance this, as so many of you are, in the context of raising a family, running a career, having a home. You know, maybe half your family is with you on this, half your family isn't. At least the two of us, we had no other reality. And really, in truth, we just worked very, very hard. Nothing in this world is created. People imagine that things are created just by imagining that they're created. They're not really. They're created by just picking up something really heavy and dragging it a couple of inches, and then picking up something else that's really heavy and moving it a couple of inches, and then having somebody come and knock it over, and then you put it all in place again. I mean, that's what you saw. Okay, this is the essence of self-realization through service. This is the example that we saw in Swami Kriyananda. There was an extremely simple attitude that he had. It was extremely simple. I am my Guru's disciple. This is my Guru's mission. This is the reason I was born. And he never allowed anything to distract him from that. Now, bear in mind, that is a particular karmic freedom that not everyone has. So I'm going to back up and first tell a slightly different story, because I think it's important in the room. Many years ago, Swamiji often spent time in our house over the course of the 25 years from when we moved to Ananda Village before he passed away, from Ananda Village. Our house in Palo Alto sort of became a meeting ground. He would often bring leaders from Ananda Village, and we would have meetings in our living room. It was sort of like they were home but away from their responsibilities. So it was a kind of mental freedom there that everyone enjoyed. So he spent lots and lots of time in our house over the course of the years. And he would often give satsangs for us. We were very fortunate that we had a lot of his time. And he came once for a long enough period of time that he was going to give 2 different satsangs for 2 different groups within our family there. Just to try to make it a little bit clear, the sadhaka order is essentially people who have many other karmic responsibilities besides Ananda. They may be very deep, you may be very deep on the spiritual path, but the karmic condition of your life involves you in many other things. You know, as I say, careers, families, relatives, creative ambitions. It's not necessarily a judgment on your sincerity, it's just the karmic condition that you're under, and that's the sadhaka order. Then the other order is the sevaka order, and the sevaka order are those people such as myself and Ramani and others that you know here, who have no other karmic responsibilities. It's just Ananda is the center, everything else can be either just neglected or certainly subservient to that. And that's a particular karmic life. We call that monastic. because that's the traditional monastic idea, is that you leave everything behind. So within the Ananda community, we had both groups very strong. So when Swamiji was going to speak, he was going to speak to both groups separately. The sadhakas are always needing to understand what their job is, because the monastic Sevaka order is clearer. The sadhakas always have a little bit of a harder time, which I feel is part of where your question is coming from. It's a little bit confusing, isn't it? And so Swamiji said, as we're walking over to where the program was, "What do you want me to talk about?" This was the sadhaka group. I said, "Sir, why don't you try to talk to them about what it means to be a sadhaka?" Because nobody really could ever get it straight. Because they didn't want to feel like second-class citizens or like their discipleship wasn't sincere, but they weren't able to live the same way the monastics were able to live. Why don't you talk about that, Swamiji? So he sits down and he starts giving this satsang, which turned out to be one of the just an incredibly deeply moving satsang. And he starts talking to us, as he often did, about that period of time when he was expelled from Self-Realization Fellowship and found himself completely on his own. And he was living in the back bedroom of his parents' house and gradually just kind of trying to find his footing and get on his way. And Dr. Chaudhry in San Francisco started having him teach, and he began to teach a little bit. And his father was a very honorable and a very devoted father, but he also had very strong standards about a man taking care of himself. So he supported Swamiji, who was 36 years old by that point, but he didn't coddle him, he just supported him. But at a certain point, Swami was always having to borrow one of his parents' cars because he didn't have one. Because as a monk in SRF, he owed nothing. He had $15 a month allowance, and he took that monastic vow extremely seriously, that he lived only for God and that all of that was behind him. And his father said to him, "You know, if you're going to be borrowing this car all this time, I think I should just give it to you. You should own it yourself." And now Swami's telling us this story, and his eyes begin to fill with tears, and literally tears are going down his face like this. And at that time for Swami to cry was very unusual. In the last decade of his life, all he had to say was "Guru," and all of a sudden he was just weeping. But then he was much more veiled. He was much more veiled. But he's talking to us about the car. Tears are running down his cheeks. I find it emotional to talk about it too. He said, "I can't begin to express to you how painful it was to realize that I was in fact going to have to own this car. That it wasn't fair to my father to just keep borrowing it, but if he wanted to give it, I had to take it." He said, "I had renounced all of that. And now all of a sudden I was going to have to be a person who owned a car again." And then he had to stop and just go like this for a few minutes. And then he went on. And then he finished the satsang, and he turned to me and he said, "Oh, is there anything else, Asha, that I should talk about?" And I said naively, "Why don't you talk about what it means to be a sadhaka?" Very often with Swamiji, I would say something that I think had an obvious meaning, and then I'd realize there was He just turned to me and he said, "That's all I have been talking about." I mean, he's been weeping because he had to own a car, and he's telling me that he's been explaining to these householder devotees how to live. And then he said, "Don't even think about living the way I live." He said, "You would not be able to do it, and it wouldn't be good for you even to try." He said, you have to be where God has put you, and then you have to live rightly according to what your own karma asks of you. So in his remarkable way, instead of answering the question directly, he answered it by contrast, so that we could see, oh, this is what it means to really have nothing left to do. So where am I standing in relation to that, and how can I move appropriately from where I am to where I want to be? Because the mistake that people make all the time, which completely just muddles up their spiritual life, is they prefer a romantic idea of what I would like my spiritual life to be, instead of the extremely often boring and usually daunting task of actually dealing with the karma that you have. And then we live like a house divided. That we have this imaginary life of longing for a certain freedom that we don't have, and then we have the challenge of working through the karma that we do have to get to that freedom. But we're not always in complete alignment doing this. And what simply happens is very simple. There's no going to hell for doing that. We just waste a lot of time because our energy is actually not directed at the edge of where we're standing. I sort of put it like we try to work out someone else's karma because it always looks more interesting and easier than our own. But it just doesn't do anything for us. And whatever karma we have, however much we dislike it or wish we didn't have it, whether it's physical debility, unfriendly relatives, psychological complexes, internal wounds, addictions, attractions, whatever they might be, aspirations that we can't quite reconcile with our spiritual aspirations, that we're just confused, whatever it might be, it just is what it is. And the only way from here to there is through it. I often think of the image of a seed, because a seed is such an... I'm no gardener, I've never been a gardener. When you first arrived at Ananda in the years that I came, you either went into building, because there was nothing there, so you either put up buildings, you grew food, or you cooked the food. Those were about the only jobs there were, and I went into cooking the food, so I never learned to grow it. But a seed is so remarkable. I mean, on so many levels, a seed is remarkable. Every Sunday when we do our fire ceremony in our temple there, we throw rice into the fire. And of course, the image of the rice is that each one of those little things can create bazillions of others. And this is the image of karma, which is it's just too poignantly true. You're looking at this huge pot of rice and you're thinking of the multitudinous potentials of more rice through all of this. But I mean, a piece of rice does not vibe as a vibrant thing, but there's so much planted in there. But in order for it to get from that spot to being a huge plant producing more and more of itself, there's just all of these necessary steps. And it doesn't matter how much you yell at that rice to become a fruitful plant, or throw it against the wall and try to insist, or throw yourself against the wall and try to make it change. It will move, it will unfold exactly according to how it's going to unfold. And if you don't treat it properly every step of the way, you will not get there faster. See, that's the illusion that the ego gives us, that we'll somehow get there faster if we skip these necessary steps. But what happens is we don't get there at all because we're at war with ourselves. And our energy is always going, wishing things were different than they are. So the first thing to make anything a success, I mean, to weave together some of the things we're talking about, you have to have a solid foundation. And for every devotee contributing to the success of an enterprise, there always has to be a solid foundation, and that has to be sincere, and you have to build it as you can build it. And nobody else, there's no them on the spiritual path. There's no them who are going to do it for you. There's no centralized Bureau of Ananda. There's no great wealthy patron who's going to do it. I mean, this is the board of directors, which is actually, it's a pretty solid group. But it's not made out of anybody else's energy. It's just not, Ananda doesn't really exist except as a collection of people's energy. It's unfortunate, in my mind, that we have as much established as we actually do have established now. For this reason, I mean, the temple that we have, which is this beautiful Catholic church, and many things are possible because of the size and shape of that room. It literally makes it possible. You can dance up the aisle, you can have a children's play on the stage, and the music sounds good. I mean, there's just many things that are possible. I never walk into that room without thanking God for it, because it's very real. At the same time, once something is physically and materially manifested, it's very easy to lose track of what it actually is, because we tend to define things from the outside. When Ananda was just a dirt heap of a farm and a bunch of tacky old buildings, most of which leaked, it was very hard to mistake the form for the energy. It was simply the energy, and it was the excitement and the thrill of doing it. So no matter what, whether you're meeting here, whether you're meeting on the sidewalk, whether you're in a beautiful temple somewhere, the only thing that's ever happening is your unity with God and gurus, and then with each other. And these are the two pieces of what makes Ananda what it is. In the path, in the last part of the path, the chapter called His Last Days, I believe, Swamiji has a sentence in there that he may have edited it when he wrote the new path, so I'm going to give myself credit. No, actually, I think I went back and looked. It's the same in both books, because I didn't remember it, and I only read it recently, that I remembered it. Master Swamiji says, the spiritual path is not only our internal relationship with God, but it is also spiritualizing our relationship with the objective world, especially with each other. And learning really to make those bonds of fellowship and friendship with each other is as important. That we have to have the internal and the external. Now, that is a way of thinking about all the other karmic conditions that come with you and all the people and things that come with you. That isn't to spiritualize your relationship with the objective world is as important for your sadhana as it is to make your inner relationship with God. But to also realize that what Ananda is two or more gathered together. And as often as you can gather together, and as sincerely and as lovingly as you can gather together, that's really what makes it what it is. A center is convenient, a beautiful center is convenient, an organized program is convenient, but none of that really has anything to do with what Ananda is, because we could have all of that and just be as dead as a doornail. I mean, you look around and there's a lot of groups. When we were looking to buy our temple now some 20 years ago, there were all these churches in the area that were vibrant 40 years ago that are now this beautiful real estate, and 12 or 20 people meet together, mostly aging. There's nothing going on, but some vibrant group decades ago paid off the real estate, so they can just sit there. We just paid off our real estate. We just paid down our mortgage, and so now our temple is free and clear, as we've called it. But sometimes I wonder if we've actually done the future a favor. I hope we have, because the necessity to make our own way has kept us honestly engaged with people. Because if you have too much money, you don't have to pay any attention to anything. You can just make it up yourself, and that is a dicey position to be in. Ivory tower syndrome can fall in. If you can't pay the rent if they don't come, you have to think a little bit about how you're reaching people. But in the context of where you are right now, it's your connection with each other based on our mutual attunement. And what will make that successful is a deeply dedicated attitude toward the primary importance of that in your own life. And if circumstances conspire to, give somebody else the laboring oar on that, and you can just slide into it, I mean, that is a convenience, but that won't guarantee anything unless all of your hearts are also in there. Then there's just sort of a mystery of really how it happens. I started to say all that time ago, David and I just deeply and wholeheartedly believed that it was possible. And we're both people of very high energy, and we had complete freedom. And we just worked day and night and day. Somebody asked me just yesterday, or a few days ago, how do you balance your personal and your work life? I said, by dissolving the boundaries. I said, I dissolved those boundaries the day I came to Ananda. I don't have any, there's no difference between my personal life and my other life. It's just life. And for me, actually, that was the great freedom of Ananda. Wow, I don't have to make distinctions. I can just be wholeheartedly into everything. And then I thought for a minute, and I said, oh, David and I used to take a 3-week vacation every year. And that was essential. I mean, we did have to have some time, and we have no children, so that's all the karmic freedom that you have. I remember at one point saying to David, no marriage, not even ours, can survive the neglect that we have been, applying to it in the last so many, whatever it was. And then we started at least just taking a few weeks off every year. But after that, I think you have to make the best of what God gives you, and you have to accept it with gratitude and utilize it to the fullest. The laws of gratitude are very simple. If you don't appreciate what you have, why will more be given to you? And also, if you yourself don't commit your energy to what you have and serve it, this is the essence of self-realization through service. You have to serve it. Things don't happen just by themselves. And maybe you don't have time or energy or money. That can be a fact. I've always been touched by this wonderful story about one of Ramakrishna's disciples. Ramakrishna was the avatar in India in the 1800s. One of his disciples had to work so hard just to support his family that he would come to see Ramakrishna after his workday was over, and he would lie down and he would go to sleep. And then he would sleep there through the night, and then early in the morning he'd get up and go back to work. He couldn't stay awake at all. And Ramakrishna used to make a little bed for him. And some of the other disciples criticized him, how disrespectful. And Ramakrishna always defended him. He said, this is the only way he can be here, so this is when he comes. And so we have to look at ourselves, and we have to ask ourselves, I say that I want more to happen, but how much of myself am I giving to create the magnetism that will cause that to happen? In the early years of Ananda Village, we had a situation that was so small and so isolated. It's physically isolated now, but the isolation was vastly greater. No telephones, no internet, no electricity, no TV, no radio, for the most part no cars, except just a few. 9 women shared one VW Bug, and which I managed to wreck on more than one occasion. We would sit, several in the front, several would stand through the sunroof, and then a few would sit. Whenever we had to ride it together. We first called that car St. Clair, for the poor Claires, but it kept breaking down, and we decided that was a terrible name. So we called it St. Lynn after that, Rajasi. Better energy. But that was like, when the 9 of us had access to that car, that was a really big deal. But that meant that we always, and the community was small, we always knew where everyone was. If you weren't there, where were you? There was no place that you could be, because you couldn't get away, couldn't get off the property, and where could you be? So, as a consequence, you had no freedom at all. It just didn't cross your mind. Plus, if you weren't there, it didn't happen. Because it was such a small group. It wasn't like you could just take tonight off and they would make the event happen. The event wasn't there unless you were there. Sunday service, as an example. It never crossed our minds that we wouldn't go to Sunday service. The thought never entered. Everyone went, because there was no Sunday service unless everyone went. And sometimes Swami was speaking, but not always, because we understood that this was being created out of our love for it. And money didn't even enter it because we didn't have any. But if you did have any, of course you gave it into it. We used to call Ananda a giant mom and pop store, where everyone just, this is mine. This isn't anybody else's, this is mine. And so there's no boundary between what is mine and what is it. It's that in the context of all the karmic responsibilities I have, which you can't be at war with yourself, you have to be there with all of it. But in that context, where do I put my edge? I'm responsible for feeding my family, for putting a roof over my head. Am I responsible for there being a temple? Or is that somebody else's responsibility and I just go? I mean, you don't expect someone else to feed your own baby. You feed your baby. And you don't expect someone else to put the clothes on your body or the food on your table. This is me. That's how you say, this is mine. Is the spiritual, is your source of spiritual inspiration, does that also belong to you? Or is that something that people just give you? That somebody else takes care of, and that's really theirs, I just go and take from that. And how far can you put the sense of I into that? And that's a huge shift. This is why we always encourage people to tithe rather than donate. And I've spent the last 40 years explaining the difference between tithing and donating with almost no success. So I will try again, even though I'm extremely depressed even as I start to explain it. You donate money because you have extra. This is my money. These are my needs. I have met my needs. And oh, look, I have extra. So I think I'll find a worthwhile cause to give my extra money to. And donating is a really good idea. Tithing says 10% of anything that comes to me belongs to God first. Before I say this is mine, I say all abundance comes from God, and 10% of it is what I hand back. 10% is biblical. In the book of Leviticus, it says, on Mount Sinai, God said to Moses, 1/10 of everything you give back to me, because it belongs to me, because you live and breathe at my pleasure. And this is the commission you pay on life, which means if you earn $1 a year, you pay 10 cents. If you earn 100,000, you pay 10,000. It's always in proportion, and the proportion is always the same. There's the famous Ananda tithing story of the people whose first tithing check was $50, and the most recent one was 1 million. But it was 10% straight through, and they never stopped. Just whatever it is. Rich people write a big check and it scares them because it's so big. Poor people write a small check and it scares them because they don't have very much. But everybody's equally scared. Really equally scared. Because where does our security come from? And what really supports me? And where is the edges of what I call me? So, what am I responsible for? We automatically take responsibility for myself, but where is the edge of myself? And does it include the spiritual house as well as the physical house? Does it include the spiritual family house and welfare as well as my biological family and welfare? And the essence of self-realization through service is to use every possible opportunity you can to break down this fearful, selfish ego identification with that which is unreal, that we imagine is actually the source of our security. And we cling desperately to that which can't support us at all, and we wonder why we're so nervous all the time. You know? It's really, of course we're nervous. We were just all talking here about this hurricane in Hawaii, which is apparently doing considerable damage, including to an Ananda group that we have over there, Polestar. Apparently they've lost a lot of what they've worked very hard to build. But when Mother Nature wants it, she doesn't really care at all. I was in Northern California where we live in 1989, now some time ago, when a very significant earthquake happened, the one where the piece of the Bay Bridge fell. I'm sure all of you saw 100,000 times the piece of the Bay Bridge falling, because it was the most dramatic footage from the whole thing. I was sitting in the building in our community, which is a wooden structure. And wood is a good structure for earthquakes because they have this capacity to do things like that. And I'm sitting in this room, and the room starts going like this. Of course, earthquakes, they don't announce themselves. Hurricanes, you have all this anticipation. Earthquakes, as a general rule, everything is fine and then it isn't. So everything is fine, and then all of a sudden the building just begins to go like this. And the first thing, and this big loud noise, this first thing I think of is earthquake proof. There's no such thing. That just crossed my mind. There's no such thing as earthquake proof. The power of Mother Nature makes mankind so insignificant. It's just a question of how long and how hard she shakes it. And so I immediately went right out of the building. Psychologically, or somewhere in the back of my mind, the problem seemed to me that the building was swaying. So if I could get out from under the building, everything would be fine. So I go out onto the lawn, and the lawn is undulating. I mean, you have no idea, one has no idea how deeply fixated it is in your mind that the earth doesn't move. I mean, you all are in earthquake country here, so you know. When the earth actually moves, it's like everything inside of you splits. You just don't know where to put it. And I'm watching the earth undulate like this. I'm watching the trees, do this. And we have a swimming pool, and I watch a great deal of the water of the swimming pool crest up over the fence and come over like this. It was a very tiny tsunami, just over like that. But I watched my mind frantically look for stability somewhere. Because externally, I just couldn't see it. And I'm not proud of how I responded. I really never got into the Om Guru. I never got there. It ended before I got there. I was still casting about looking for security somewhere and just watching my world crack. And many years prior to that, when I was at Ananda village, when the fire came through in 1976, it was the same thing. We're standing there. We have our little firefighting tools and our little squirty backpacks, and there's several dozen of us, and we had these little blue coats, these long sleeve coats. We had our firefighting gear. Somebody had gotten a deal on these little mandarin collar blue jackets. So this was during the Vietnam War, and so we sort of looked like Vietnamese peasants because they looked like the little communist jackets. We're all dressed in these little communist jackets. There's all these clouds. We have these backpacks and these little tools. And we went over, Jyotish in the Finding Happiness movie stands at that spot and talks about how we went over to fight the fire. I was part of that group. There was a fire break, which is to say just a dirt road that had been dragged, cut much earlier, hopefully to stop the fuel so that you could stop the fire. So we went over and we're standing in that fire break and we're going to stop the fire. And the fire comes right to the edge, and it actually went like this. Ha ha, it said. And it just went right over our heads, and suddenly it's burning behind us. Fortunately, this is just low grass, so it's not like, but we are not stupid. Well, we're not completely stupid. But it's like, this is not working. And so we got, on the back side of the fire and then looked at it. Then we looked over to the side, some hundreds of yards, and we'd had very poor brush clearing. We learned a lesson. And there were very dense trees, and all of our houses were in that area of dense trees. And the fire did something called tree topping, which it hits the base of a tree, shoots up, and then it starts going across the top of the trees, and it goes really fast once that happens. So it started tree topping, and that was the point where we just took off our little jackets and threw down our little tools and tried to get what we could out of the houses. Fortunately, all the people were safe. But it was also one of those moments, which is how ridiculous this is, that we imagine that we have any power or control over the material world. That we think that we can just put our energy, outward, and that this world is going to conform. As soon as Mother Nature, fire, flood, wind, earthquake, as soon as she wants it, like that. So what do we really want to dedicate ourselves to? We have to make a home if we're raising a family. We have to have a career. We have to do things. Swamiji didn't ignore this world. Sri Yukteswar ignored this world. Master did not ignore this world. Swami did not ignore this world. He worked with the material universe and felt it was important for us to create a certain reality, which is what we're all assiduously doing here. But you either create that with the thought that this is what I'm actually doing, or you create it from inside your heart, realizing that what I am really doing is I am a disciple, I am a devotee of God, and this is me. This is what I do. I live, I breathe, I do what I can to bring spirit into the world. And that's everything that we're doing. I do what I can to bring spirit into the world. Whether it's raising my children properly, being kind to my clients at work, giving what I can to the spiritual temple, attending the event so that there'll be magnetism there, so that others will find the magnetism, or creatively writing music, writing books, writing poems, making movies, whatever it is that each of us feels from inside our heart is really going to be my service. And then what am I going to choose? And believe me, it's a fight. It's not like it's just effortless ease. We are, to use the modern language, we are deeply addicted to ego, really deeply addicted. And we're deeply addicted to the picture of ease and pleasure. And it's a constant, and it's the fight, again, it's the fight of the seed to become the full-grown productive plant. That it's fought in the most boring, sort of mundane, everyday battle never won kind of manner, where you just have to start over again and keep going. I watched Swamiji for so many years, and of course, he was so free. Well, you can't even begin to speak of his freedom. It was so beyond anything. At the same time, he played the part, and he was always pushing. He was always pushing forward. I remember, and I wrote this in my book about him, when he was recording the Bhagavad Gita series, or maybe it was television programs for India. I think it was the Conversations with Master, it may have been, in fact. But I was there for part of it. I sort of, since the first years of my spiritual life, I worked for Swami directly. After that, for most of the time, I was somewhere else, and I would drop in and out of his life, of the events of his life. And I was in India when he was making this film, and he'd been filming for many days, and he would set himself, I'm going to do 5 programs a day, I'm going to do 10 programs a day, and if you ever urged him, which I did mistakenly a couple of times, don't work so hard, don't do so much, get thee behind me, Satan, he actually said to me once. You're the voice of temptation, you're not the voice of wisdom. I don't want you telling me to affirm my weakness. Tell me that, you stand by me while I do this. But that particular day I made breakfast for him, and I left him to have breakfast quietly, and I came back and he was like that. He was just literally like this. And he said, I don't have the strength to eat. Just like, I just don't have it. By that time I'd learned, so I didn't urge him to not film. I just sympathized and sort of sat with him and kind of encouraged him to take a little bit of food. But as soon as he sat down to start doing what God had asked him to do, he had all the energy in the world. I mean, repeatedly, we've watched him over the years. As soon as it would be all this temptation not to do it, but as soon as he would give himself to what he was born to do, then the energy would come to him. And then as soon as it was done, he would collapse again often. And that was the way it was. But who am I? What I am I supporting here? Laughingly once, he was on his way to Europe, and we had a man in London at that time who was a bit of a difficult character. Being in his company was not always effortless ease. And Swamiji had an overnight in London on his way to Europe, and is he just going to take the night for himself in a hotel, or is he going to call this guy? And this was before email, but he had a telephone, one of those telephones with a handle and a rotary dial, many remember. And he kept sort of reaching for the phone and then not, then reaching for the phone and then not. And I finally articulated, you're trying to decide which is more difficult, to spend the evening with this man or to reincarnate and have to do it later. He said, yes, that's exactly it. And then he reached for the phone, he dialed his number, and made plans to meet him. But that's the question you have to ask yourself all the time. It's bad enough now, do I want to have to do it again? That certainly has gotten me through many a tough spot. Yes, go ahead.
You said something earlier, and then this, I just had to jump in. Dealing with difficult relatives,
Mm-hmm.
to choose to cut them out of your life, or to choose to try and be there for them, even when it can seem almost soul-crushing sometimes. Is that a... Here's what you have to be humble enough. The question is dealing with difficult relatives who can sometimes be soul-crushing, is the rather dramatic phrase we use. No, that's fair. It's very important on the spiritual path to have humility. And humility is realizing
I'm not that good. And sometimes we falsely believe that it's more spiritual to claim a level, a capacity that we don't have, but it's more spiritual to be humble enough to be able to know who you are and what you're really able to do. Because if in the battle between positive and negative magnetism, the stronger magnetism will always convert the lesser magnetism into itself. And if someone's negativity is simply stronger than your capacity to remain whole in the face of it, you're not serving them by allowing them continually to take you over. And you're definitely not serving yourself, and you're not necessarily serving God's will either. Master's phrase, which I absolutely love, is, if you are faced with a test that is bigger than you can handle, then wisdom is to run away. And he just endorsed it, because several things happen when you are continually defeated. One, you are continually defeated. And whatever positive energy you have to go forward is just beaten out of you. So not only have you lost that battle, but you've lost a bigger battle, because you also then begin to feel yourself to be a person who is defeated. And when you lose hope about your own capacity to go forward, you've really lost everything. So you have to be honest enough to be realistic. You have to weigh that against the consequences. If it's your own child and the child is 5, then you might not have a choice. If it's your husband's uncle and he would like you to go visit him often, you have a lot more choice in that matter. It might annoy the people in your life, but if you know what you're doing, you know what you're doing. And it takes a certain amount of courage to just stand up and say, this is not for me, I don't have to do this. It's inconvenient to do that. A woman wrote to me, I just published this book called Ask Asha, which has a bunch of very interesting questions in it. And because they were real questions, they weren't theoretical questions. They were like real people on the other side of what I was answering. This woman wrote, a marriage has been arranged for me and I have to go along with it, but he's not my soulmate, I don't love him. And I have been to India enough, because this letter came from India, to understand pretty much darn feels like you have to go along with it. There doesn't feel like there's a lot of latitude to make up your own mind. But I said, if you're old enough to get married, presumably you can walk across a room. You can open a door. You can get a passport. You probably can get a job. So you're telling me it's highly inconvenient not to go along with this. But that's quite different than telling me you have no choice. So part of what we have to realize is it may be highly inconvenient, but if my soul welfare is at stake, then there really is no other value than that, because you put all your faith in being a dutiful person and doing all these things for other people, and in the end, it'll serve you nothing. Much of the time, they'll just continue to take advantage of you till the end of your life. I was talking to a friend who has very demanding relatives, and she was realizing that if she meets this demand, then she can see the one just behind it, and the one just behind it, and the one just behind it, and her whole life is going to belong to people who really are not thinking about her. They're just thinking about the whole, they think they love her. It's not like they're trying to be mean, but they don't have a tuned-in reality to what's really important to her. They just have their own point of view. And yeah, they're going to be very upset with you, and your comfortable little harmony is going to go away. But if you can't sell your soul for anything, because it's not dharma to do so. And once you break dharma, then you set a negative vibration in motion, and nothing will work after that. You have to understand the difference between spiritual victory and ease and pleasure. The ego likes ease and pleasure. The soul wants triumph. And so sometimes the ego situation, it's not easy and it's not pleasurable, but if you are really doing dharma, and dharma is that which expands your consciousness and draws you closer to God. And if you're doing dharma, the motto of Ananda, which has always been proven true, where there is dharma, there is victory. Not short term, not in the world's eyes necessarily, but there's always victory if you're doing Dharma. And if you're not following Dharma, then it will never work out anyway. And if once you get that, like really in the marrow of your bones, it's really not so hard to stand by Dharma. And you can stand by quite calmly and quietly and very lovingly. Oh, I would so love to do that for you, but I just can't. I would really like to do what you're asking, but I just can't. And then you don't have to make a huge deal about it. You don't have to explain to them everything. You're just quietly, I just can't do it. And you just stand there. I'm a person of a bazillion words, and I've learned slowly that sometimes fewer is better. Gee, I just can't. And then you just wait. And it's amazing how when you really just plant yourself in the truth of a situation, everybody else just kind of settles in around you. As long as you're giving them space, they'll keep at you. But as soon as you stop, they may kerfuffle for a while, but they'll get used to it. And in the end, they'll respect you. Maybe not in the end of this incarnation, but in the end. Is that fair? Yeah. Now, if it's merely inconvenient and you really can be helpful, that's a whole different story. Soul crushing was the key word there. Another.
The issue with me is with my mother. I'm trying to arrange sort of a reunion, and I need to respect my brother's dharma, which is she's soul crushing to them, and for me, I have to kind of look at it and decide what I want to do, but realize that I'm in a different place than where my brothers are, and to respect their decision.
And they have completely different karma. The hardest thing in the world is to realize that there's someone else on this planet besides you. It's easy to say, but we're always thinking that whatever's true for us must be true for them. Or take it farther. I remember I was urging upon David some transformation of his character that would make my life more pleasant. My only defense is this was early on. And for reasons that I still can't unravel, Swami got involved in the conversation. And he not when David was present, but somehow, I don't know, I must have told him. It's not the kind of thing I would normally tell him. I wouldn't normally say, David is being like this and so, but for some reason I must have said it. And I said, don't you think it would be a good idea if David adopted my suggestion? Somebody said, oh yes, because I wasn't wrong. But he said, but you have to wait until he wants it for himself. Just as simple as that. Duh. But that's what happens. We can see where someone might go and then immediately want to force them to go there now. And if they don't get it, they don't get it. And the seed will not become a tree except by going through every single stage it has to go through. And if you're standing at the point where the thing is sprouting leaves, but they're standing at the point where it's just a mere stick, you can't have them skip that. People learn from experience and only from experience. Because I know a lot of you listen to the internet tapes, I have to repeat myself here. I used to be able to travel and people didn't know the stories already, but it's gone. For all the years of my life, David told me if you put the suitcases on the hood of the car, it will scratch the hood of the car. Oh, yes. Even if it's a soft-sided suitcase that just looks like canvas. And because he would usually be with me, I would be lifting them up to put them on the hood of the car to leave them there because it was comfortable for reasons, and he would always tell me not to. So I put them on the dirty ground, which I never wanted to do. I'm alone, traveling alone with this soft-sided canvas bag in his car. I'm up at Ananda village. I don't want to set it in the dirt because it's going to get all, it's really a lot of dirt. So I just set it on the hood of the car, go about my business, and then, because it was a little heavy, I pulled it off. Whoa, what do you know? It scratched the hood of the car. And I had scratched the hood, which was an issue, but mostly I was just amazed. Look at that. And then, of course, I looked, and there are these little metal feet. And when there's a little bit of weight, and you drag it across, it drags the car. I can't tell you how many times he told me that. I never believed him until I scratched it myself. And I thought, wow, something so objective. I mean, I had no emotional reason not to believe, except the don't you tell me what to do sort of issue between husbands and wives. But it was so graphic to me of how many times I've told people that attitude will cause you suffering. If you keep on like this will be the consequence. Don't you want to take this on? Why are you holding on to that? And people just... because it's not real to them until you do it. Because this is Ananda, and I was at Durga and Vidura's house. I called Vidura out and I said, look what I just did to David's car. And so I said, you telephone him and tell him that I've scratched up the hood of his car, because when you two talk about it, you'll think it's funny. So by the time I get home, and God bless Vidura, he made it seem like we were going to have to refinish the entire car. So when David actually saw this little scratch in there, oh, that's nothing, he said. I mean, he's very sweet anyway. He would never have really gotten upset about it, so everything just went. But boy, did I learn a lesson. And every time, literally, I try to tell somebody something that they're not wanting to hear, I think, they're probably going to have to scratch the car themselves with their own suitcases. And you don't help people by trying to take over their free will either, because it just makes them angry. You know, I was always a little resentful that David wouldn't let me put the suitcases on the hood of the car and I had to cover them with dirt instead. Not anymore, but I mean, it's such a small thing and I was still resentful. Think about it. Sumakshi?
So just continuing what you were just saying, so what happens when that situation is actually like from within you? So there's a part of you that already knows, that a certain thing is a good idea. There's a part of you that's not yet ready to go there. And you just sort of have to patiently wait till both these things kind of come together and integrate, or you try pushing yourself and then the other part resists. And how do you bring about integration is my question. I mean, how does it happen? Apart from just waiting and
people ask me that. How do you grow spiritually? How do you bring about integration? How do you deal with the different sides of yourself? That's why I was saying at the beginning, the spiritual path is not for sissies. It's not for people who don't have a long distance run. It's not for people who are easily discouraged. It's not for anybody who wants a quick fix. It's not for people who don't have the humility to fail. It's not for people who don't have perseverance. I mean, that's why out of 1,000, only one seeks God, and out of 1,000 who seek, only one find. Because the actual reality of the spiritual path is a mess. It's just not this tidy, I start and it's just wonderful, and even though Master says every day's meditation should be deeper than the one before, I'll just speak for myself. There has been nothing linear that I have been able to find about spiritual progress. It does not just go neatly and you solve that and you solve this and you solve that and this is over and that's over and then this is over and then that's over. I've never found anything like that. The picture that I like is a spiral staircase going up your spine, but the karma is not in horizontal layers, it's in vertical stripes. And the vertical stripes are of enormously varying width. So that the spiral staircase, as you circle around, you pass these strata. And you start at a certain point, it appears, and then you appear to finish it, and you think you're done. But then you come back around, and you meet it again. And maybe the next time you meet it, it's a tiny little snippet, and you just sail past it. Or maybe suddenly it's enormously wide, and it's a whole half a circuit. And then you think you're past it. And then you come around again and again. And it's just the only way that you can succeed is not to quit. And the only way you can fail is to give up. But I have never found it fruitful. Now, everybody's different. Other friends, like to make lists and make resolutions and make year plans and 5-year plans. None of that works for me. Totally freaks me out to do that. I just get up every morning, look at what's in front of me, and try to deal with it. And I try not to think about how many days I've been dealing with the same thing, or how many times I've failed. Because if I do, I can't persevere. I just figure that this is in front of me to do, and if it's still here, then I have to work with it. And I say to myself, if I give up, I'm just going to have to reincarnate and do it again. And it's bad enough to be doing it this one time. I don't want to do it more. But it just is the way it is. We we can't make a neat picture. I have found, however, that the whole system works. And it works in some strange kind of amoeba-like manner that just gradually you kind of morph into something better than what you used to be. And it's not, I have several opinions on this, and this is, I have to say, this is totally Asha's idea of things. I've never heard Swami say this. I don't actually think we do get any better at anything. I think we remain exactly the same. Within the sphere of our limited capacity, it's just that we have a greater and greater reality around it. And so even though that area of our lives may be as much of a mess as it ever was, we don't live in it as much because there's so much more going on. Or else we just don't care. We somehow move away from it without ever fixing it. Whereas my idea of the path before was that everything got in order. And so I was always, well, I use the phrase, at war with myself, trying to get myself to be somebody I wasn't. I finally decided I might as well get happy. And so I decided to be happy first. I just would be happy. And if I was incompetent and embarrassing and just completely worldly, then at least I was happy. And I wouldn't be happy because I had embraced it. I would just be happy because it wasn't worth sweating about it anymore. And I would just watch myself play out things that I wished I wasn't playing out, but I just would turn my attention to the part that was working. And over many years, somehow the habit of being happy has gotten strong enough that even when all the rest of it sort of whirls around, it just doesn't make a lot of difference. So it's about proportion. And then, I mean, yes, definitely things go away, but not quite like you think they will when you have this neat linear way of doing it. That's when I was very early on the path, that very first summer, 1971, I remember, because I was very mental and I was always trying to figure it out, and I thought if I could just figure it out, then it would all work. And I was cooking, and I wasn't able to cook very well. And Swami actually said to me, which took me many years to understand, you were so mental you couldn't taste the food. And he was right. I was so in my mind, I couldn't tell that the food I was cooking was just bland and uninteresting. It was healthy, therefore it must be good. And it took a little rebellion on the part of all the people I was feeding before it began to occur to me that I needed to do something else. But I understood exactly what he meant. Even now, sometimes, I'm so busy in my mind, I don't experience what's going on around me. So I said to Swami, but see, like everyone, whatever we're doing, we think that if we just did more of it, it'll bring us the right result. It rarely occurs to us that we're on the wrong track altogether. So I said to Swamiji, because I could tell it wasn't working, I said, Swamiji, I really think that I need to improve my power of analysis. That's what I actually said to him. He was sitting in a chair in front of me. My memory is, although I'm sure this didn't happen, that he went, no! Like that. That he actually rose from the chair and put his arms out. In retrospect, I don't think he did. But I think his energy just came out from the chair. No, he said, just like that, like, woman, you're out of your mind. No. And he said, work on devotion, just like that. And many years before, I mean, that's the simplest thing you could say, but before I really got that I kept thinking I could straighten it out. And I kept thinking that to be spiritual was to straighten it out. And I finally realized it was simply to forget it and just love God and be happy and serve and do what I could and take responsibility for Master's work. And then if she's kind of a mess over here, just bring her along. I don't know how else to put it, but that's sort of what I did. I just started doing what I could, and she came along, and she caused a lot of trouble. She did some really, really dumb things and got really mixed up, but I just kept her with me while I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. she kind of shrank in proportion and got well, once when Swamiji, when I forced him to give me a compliment, he wasn't a person who went around passing out praise. I forced him to give me a compliment. He was doing something. So he was saying something to someone else, and I kind of just put my face in front of his in such a way that, that it would have been really, really rude not to say something. So he said, "Well, Asha, you're a lot less confused than you used to be." But I was a lot less. It was a huge compliment. And, I realized I was a lot less confused. And the confusion was just on that point. How do I used to write Swami these long letters of, if this, then that, and then that because of this, and then this because of that, and that because, and he would just, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong. It seemed necessary to me to, and the answer was love God. And I just didn't get it. He just nudged me forward, and we dragged her along with us until she lost interest. Does that make sense? It's a very important question. Yeah. Especially if you have a big brain. A big and noisy brain. But a big and noisy brain, I should finish this. Swami Kriyananda was the most intelligent person I have ever met, ever. Just, like the distance from here to the moon, above anybody I ever knew. We would try to figure out a problem, come up with an idea. And the people at Ananda are bright. A lot of really bright people put their minds to something, nothing. Sit down with Swami in 3 or 4 minutes. He'd just cut right through and see right where we were trying to go. And, just in terms of holding forth on so many different subjects. The last decade of his life, he was very different. But in the early years, he had this enormous personality that he used to use all the time. And I've always really valued intelligence, so I really enjoyed that. But I would try to figure out what makes him so smart, because he's smart in such a different way than anybody else I know. And I finally realized that he was smart from his heart. Because his heart, and this is Master's statement, that reason follows feeling. And that whatever you're predisposed to feel with your heart, your mind is going to spin all these reasons to support it. Swamiji he was just neutral in his heart. He did not have likes and dislikes. He did not have a position that he had to protect. He was not trying to avoid being hurt. There was nothing. It was just completely calm. So his heart was just calmly receptive to what was true. And as a consequence, his mind was completely unclouded. And so he could look at any situation and he could just see it for what it was. Whereas I, and many people that I knew, just were always a little biased. There was some level of personal anxiety that would tip the balance and cloud the window. But he was just what is true. And then from his heart, it would go right to his mind, and he would be able to say whatever he wanted to say. So it isn't a question, if you have a big brain, of making your brain smaller, which in an odd sort of way is the kind of thing you think. I just shouldn't be so intellectual. I shouldn't read so much. I shouldn't do this. No, absolutely not. You have to make your heart as big as your mind. That's the point. If you have a big brain, then you need to develop a very big heart and a very, very courageous and calm heart. In fact, Swamiji said in meditation, people always talk about calming the mind, but it's actually the heart you have to calm. Because when the heart is calm, the mind is automatically calm. The mind is restless because the heart is flipping around with all its opinions and desires. Is this meditation going well? Is this meditation deeper than yesterday? Maybe not. How much time is left? I wonder what's going to happen next. Oh, I'm so worried about this. And then we can go there. We could do that. I want this. I want this. Oh, yes. Hong Sa. I taught him, meditation. Yeah, exactly. I taught meditation. That's why devotion is everything. Because I've never had a baby, but I've watched a lot of new parents. And, you don't have to tell the parents to think about their child. They can't think of anything else. Even grandmothers, who are often at a distance. Would you like to see the pictures of my grandkids? And here he is eating an apple, and here he is with the apple core in his hand, and then here he is when he puts the apple core down. And just like, if you love, that's where it goes. And you forget yourself. You don't have to try to discipline it away. That's all there is to it. So. Any other thoughts or questions or subjects? Mm-hmm.
Asha, would you like to talk about starting new communities, maybe in other places in the world?
The idea of starting new communities in other places in the world, it's not a theoretical discussion. And Ananda has never, except for Los Angeles, it springs out of the energy that's there, and it has to be grounded with people who are able to carry it forward. It's impossible to say it would be nice to have a community here, we ought to have a community here. There has to be a magnetic force to pull it. And then that magnetic force has to be cultivated. And there just has to be magnetism, and the magnetism comes out of people. This was just where the conversation started today. I'm on my way to New Zealand in September. And I'm going to New Zealand because they speak English. And I don't like to be translated because I don't like to have to wait. And I wanted to go someplace where there was nothing in place, just for fun. But I sent out letters. We had about 400 names of devotees in Australia and New Zealand. I sent out these letters to all of those devotees. And I got immediately a letter back from a woman in New Zealand. Yes, we want you to come. I will fix your tour. I'll make it happen. And she followed through completely. In Australia, I got a number of letters from people who said, wow, that would be nice. Gee, that would be great. Wow, that would be fun. But there was nobody who gave me any energy. And it wasn't that they were necessarily bad. They just either didn't know how, didn't have the time, didn't have the confidence. But nobody was committed to it. So I'm going all the way to New Zealand. I'm not going to Australia at all. I'm hoping that this woman and another friend of hers also, that their perception of the receptivity of people there is accurate. But in truth, I would go only for her, because there's so much magnetism in her commitment and in her friend's commitment that's enough for me to go and try to plant it there. But I can't just say, oh, we ought to go to Australia, because there's no magnetism on which to hang it. When before I moved to Palo Alto, David and I would travel up and down the West Coast, actually all the way to Texas, and I did that for a number of years. And we would always go where there was magnetism. But in a few cases, the magnetism was just a few individuals. And so we keep visiting them until we persuaded them to move to Ananda Village, which we did several times. And then we stopped going to that city anymore because there was no other magnetism there. And there has to be magnetism either in place, drawing energy, or after I come back from New Zealand, I'll see. If we can get enough of a response and there's enough energy, then we'll put more energy into it. But if the people in place don't have enough energy, there's nothing that can be done about it. It's all about magnetism. And people find themselves karmically alone or in very small groups. And this is the karma that one has to face. And leadership is always the limitation, always. Swamiji said when he was in charge of the centers for SRF, he takes the blame actually for setting in place a lot of some of their terrible systems, because he himself decided he wanted to separate the success of a center from the people who were leading it. He wanted to try to make it successful without having to have a leader. And so he was the one who suggested coordinated Sunday service programs. He, however, had it be a suggested outline. It gradually became a mandated, had to be this, and it could only be read, couldn't be spoken. Leadership was totally taken out of the picture. But Swamiji said he tried as hard as he could. Kamala Silva was in charge of the Oakland Center. Of course, she's a great soul. He said the Oakland Center was, head and shoulders more successful than any other SRF center. Kamala retired, and from night to morning, it became the worst center. I mean, it was her. And when that happened, he realized you can't separate it. Magnetism comes through people. But here you all are. You may surrender that responsibility to someone else, but that's not to your benefit to do that. You need to be humble, but everybody has something to give. If you know anything about the spiritual path, you know more than somebody else knows. I mean, there's somebody on the planet who knows less than you, and that person is your responsibility. And if you just keep working it like that, then everything moves forward. And I have to then add a caveat here. I've never been an administrator of an organization, Ananda or any others, because I'm really, really lousy at it. So others who have responsibility may give you another answer. I'm a creative artist in essence, and so a creative artist does their own thing and then creates the magnetism around it. So I can help to a certain extent, but I can't make systems and ideas. I just see that it's all about people. Just as simple as that, which is sort of where we started. Any other questions or thoughts? We have a few more minutes if we want to take it. I feel like Master talking about his trip to Assisi. And now, the essence of self-realization as service is... Well?
Do you want to talk about how things are going at the farm? And it was pretty miraculous how quickly and solidly that...
It's true, but that's a very specific story.
Okay.
I mean, Swami Kriyananda's ability to help us since he exited his body is truly impressive. And his presence in people's lives, mine and everyone's, and his ability to sort of move Ananda forward through all of us is really astonishing. And so all of us should take advantage of that. You know, he's really there to help us. Swamiji exemplifies for us what it is to be a good disciple. And if that is our aspiration, the more deeply we tune into him, the more we have that power within us to do it. And we just persevere. Everybody does their best. So, pardon me? Go ahead, Sushimakshi.
Again, from what you were saying about, just taking it a step at a time, being happy first, doing that. Do you have any tricks for just looking right here? Because I guess it's also partly personality, but I sometimes have such a hard time with, okay, here now, and it's so much more tempting to look out at this this big beautiful picture in the masters, and you're in Badrinath and you get a glimpse of this huge thing, and then you're back again, and it's oh, it's about being nice to my dad today, or back again, and is there anything that's helped you just come back down to ground reality?
Well, I was very, very, very scattered in my early years. I mean, I was just all over the map. One day I used to work for the publications business. This was in the 70s, and Seva, who was then in charge of a great deal of Ananda at that point, she's now retired. She was my office mate and my friend. And I remember one morning I set off to work, which at that point meant walking over from my yoja over to what is Hansa Temple now, but was the publications building. I got up in the morning and walked over, and I planned to be at work at 8, and I arrived at 4 in the afternoon. And Seva, who was a woman of few words, said only, "Good morning." But she said it with a lot of force, and it made an impression. But the interesting thing to me was I had been, in essence, on a straight line toward my office since 8 that morning. It wasn't like I had decided not to go to the office. But this thing attracted me for a little while, that thing attracted me for a little while, this attracted me, that attracted me, this was interesting, that was interesting. And so by the time I did all of that, and I had a personal policy, which was, and you have to put this in context, I've never been a selfish person. Service has always, I've always enjoyed giving. I've been fortunate that I was born with that karma. But I always calculated my own advantage in this point of view, which is I always wanted to do that which would look like the most fun. And often what looked like the most fun to me was generous, but still I was always calculating my own position. So if something that looked like fun came in front of me, I would go with that. And if something else that looked like fun, I would go with that. fun was usually generous and helpful, but still I was always calculating my own position. And I gradually learned how demagnetizing that was, because rather than fixing my attention on my responsibilities or my goal or my duty, I was always following the likes and dislikes of my heart. It took me a long time to realize that was a problem, because the likes of my heart tended to be positive. So it wasn't like when I followed my heart, I was, out somewhere drinking and, thinking how to cheat my neighbor. But I was always shifting from my primary responsibility or objective, because I was calculating my own advantage. And I finally realized that, simply, as talented as I might be, and I have feel that God has been very generous to me in many ways, nothing would ever happen if I didn't discipline myself to the project at hand. And so the first thing that had to happen to me was I had to realize this was a problem. I didn't even know it was a problem. And then I had to start saying no, which was a very new thing for me to say no. I'd say no to myself, or I'd say no to other people. And I just had to learn to say no, and I had to stop thinking whether this would be more fun than that, and just say what I had decided to do. Fortunately, at that time, Seva was my mentor, my best friend, and my constant companion. And she was the opposite. She was the first person in all of Ananda community to show up for work at 9 and to stay till 5. She just went to work every day. This was the very early years when people were just all over the map. She was there from 9 to 5 every day. So I discipled myself to her, and whatever I had committed to her, this was my joke, but it was not a joke. If Seva and I had agreed to go to town because we were going to do our laundry, because there were no laundry facilities at the community, we were going to go and do our laundry, and we heard that Babaji was giving a satsang, I would go to town with Seva and we would do our laundry. Because I really needed to shift that part of me. Some people have to learn to say yes, I had to learn to say no. And no, it was not easy, and it was not always pleasant, but gradually, and I still fight it to this day. All writers, not all writers, because Swami doesn't, but many writers procrastinate. One of my favorite expressions by another writer is, thank heaven for writing deadlines, otherwise I'd never get my housework done. And so I still have to struggle with that all the time. Why do I wait so long to get into it? Because once I'm into it, I love it. But still, just that I said I would do it, I will do it, I made this decision, I will follow it, I won't say no, and just don't quit. Yeah, and there's a certain point at which you just don't go seeking more exciting experiences. You've had enough. Now it's time. The lesson for you is not, for me, is not more exciting experiences. The lesson for me is to put my energy into what's in front of me and do it. So, all right. Although Badrinath's pretty tempting. All right, everyone, God bless you.
Thank you, Asha.